Hello! So today we are here for a bit of an odd video. It is getting to the end of 2021, but I am going to do my best books of 2020. Having only started my booktube at the very beginning of 2021, there's so many books that I absolutely loved over the past few years that I never got a chance to talk about. I thought that I would do a bit of an archive. I'm not sure whether I'll be able to go back any further than 2019 because I didn't track my reading super well before then, but definitely 2019 and 2020 I should be able to do very thorough favorites. I did read over 100 books. I finished over 100 books. So making a favorites for 2020 is extremely difficult. I will be mentioning kind of my favorite favorites. I will be doing some honorable mentions. The honorable mentions are honestly mostly, had I read them in a different year, probably would have been complete favorites. So, and then there are many books that I read that I absolutely loved that I will not be able to mention, or this video would literally just be me listing all of the books that I read. So in a way, I think it's really nice to make a favorites video like a year later because I really have an opportunity to look back and actually mention the books that have stuck with me really, really well, because to me that is the mark of a great book. So we are going to start with nonfiction. Let's start with nonfiction. So my top two picks for nonfiction are The New Jim Crow and The Price of Inequality. Both of these books were so massively informative. I'm not sure if this was originally an academic text or if it was intended for, consumer audiences, but it is a very approachable yet also incredibly informative read about how the criminal justice system has been created and subsequently weaponized in order to basically be the new Jim Crow, in order to enforce a segregation of Black communities. And so it talks about policing, it talks about incarceration, the war on drugs, just a whole host of information that some of which I previously knew, much of which I did not. And yeah, this was incredible. I will definitely be due for a reread of this very soon. The other one of my top nonfiction favorites for 2020 was The Price of Inequality. I have talked about this in a video before. This was absolutely fundamental to my understanding of class in the US. Specifically, this book taught me a lot about how intentional kind of the divide is between working and middle class and the financial elites. I found this just so informative and so infuriating, and I highly, highly recommend it. It was extremely readable. I don't know if pop economics books is a category, but if it is, that's what he writes. And then following on nonfiction, this is a memoir, but I do have to highly, highly recommend Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Absolutely incredible. Many trigger warnings for this book, but it is so good. This is the first of a series of autobiographies that she's written, so this covers her childhood, and it was incredible. So beautiful, so moving, amazing. And then some honorable mentions for nonfiction. The book Invisible Women I did talk about in my last video. So informative. Again, this is not intersectional at all. It does not address trans women or non-binary people at all. There's very little discussion of race or any other forms of intersectionality, so that is a fundamental failing of this book, and it has been critiqued a lot for that for very good reason. But I can't deny how informative I found this book. I have some books on feminism on my list that are a little bit more intersectional that I hope to get to soon, and hopefully I'll be able to recommend them. But again, in the meantime, this is so informative. So additionally, The Fire Next Time is a collection of essays by James Baldwin. Incredible. Another collection that I found so great was Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis. That's a collection of essays and speeches that she has given. And then my last two picks for nonfiction are The Story of Stuff, which is a very, very informative book if you're at all interested in environmental issues or kind of globalization It is the story of stuff. Very good. It's also a documentary. And lastly, the book Dark Money. This is the story of the beginning of the far right, not so much the social movement, but the billionaire movement and all of the funding that has gone into the far right. Very, very interesting. Very infuriating again that these people have been swept up in this movement that they think is for them, and it is for them, but really it's more so for the billionaires. So anyway, the next category is literary fiction. Going off of purely memory of the impact that this had on me and the lasting impact, my number one pick for 2020 has to be The Overstory by Richard Powers. The story of trees, basically. It's intertwined stories covering a huge span of time, all based around trees and the preservation or destruction of trees. It's not super diverse. I also don't find the women written super well in this. The way I'm telling this, you would never guess that this was probably my favorite book of 2020, but this was like a transformative experience for me to read. It kind of came at a time where I had lost some of maybe the love of nature and the environment, just out of kind of fatigue, I guess. And this was so reinvigorating to read. He writes nature in a way that makes you kind of want to like sell all of your belongings and go join a camp that's protesting forestry or something. Like, I just found this so engrossing, so transformative. It took me like a month to read this book because I didn't want to finish it. I just kept savoring it. I kept reading small sections and just enjoying the delicious nature of it all. As something that I haven't seen people discuss, but I found really disturbing, was the depiction of a disabled character. So I do not wholeheartedly recommend this book, but I also can't deny the impact that it had for me personally. So I don't know how to navigate both of those things, so I'm just gonna tell you both and you can make your own call about this book. Another literary not discovery, but I, for the first time, read Arundhati Roy in 2020, and I did read both The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, and then I immediately ordered The God of Small Things because I loved this book so much. I think it was good that I read them in this order. I feel like most people read The God of Small Things first because it came out first, and then I didn't see nearly as many positive reviews of The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. So I think it was good that I read them in this order. This is a very sweeping tale of fundamentally about the conflict between the Hindu government and Muslim people in modern India. There are so many characters in this that have so many different life trajectories and stories and personalities and identities. I just found this so engrossing and emotional. There is a part in the middle that gets into kind of politics that I did find a little bit less engrossing, but I still loved this book. This is actually quite different. The God of Small Things is about a particular family in India who go through kind of a tragedy, and this is following them throughout their lives. This is like telescopic, and this is microscopic. Both of these were just shockingly gorgeous, incredible writing, very emotional. So another saga following two children is My Brilliant Friend. In the past year, I have continued this series, but in 2020, I read this, which is the first book of a quartet, the Neapolitan novels. I have mentioned before how much I love the writing. I think that she creates characters that are just so captivating and well fleshed out and flawed. Yeah, I will definitely finish the series. Another true experience of reading was A Brief History of Seven Killings by Marlon James. This is an incredible reading experience. This follows many characters over many years. You start in 1959 and end in 91, and it follows, again, a bunch of different characters. They have a bunch of different voices. There is patois in this book. It is about Jamaica from 1959 to 1991 about kind of the political upsets between that time, American interventions and meddling. I had no idea what was happening, probably 70% of the time reading this book, and it was great. Sometime after reading maybe a dozen or so educational books about the politics of Jamaica and US meddling in the Caribbean, and then reread this, and maybe I will sort of know then what is going on. But yeah, this was an experience unlike anything I've ever read before, and I definitely want to read more Marlon James. These two books, Mrs. Dalloway and Private Life, I'm gonna put together because they were sort of similar. Mrs. Dalloway is like a stream of consciousness, beautiful, beautiful book. I loved it. I like Virginia Woolf a lot. Private Life by Jane Smiley is not stream of consciousness, but it's a domestic novel. And both of these, in my mind, are about the experience of married women in history and to some extent up to modern times. So Private Life is the private life of a married couple, particularly following the wife, and it's kind of during like a formative time. Like it starts in 1883 and extends up to like World War II. It's like I know that the world is always changing, but I feel like to have grown up in the late 1800s and then be kind of like an older couple during World War II would have been just you experienced such a revolution of technology and culture and everything during that time. So, you know, the person that you didn't even really get to choose to be with over such a revolutionary period, that you then have to deal with their decisions and their opinions and everything, and you don't really have control over your own life. I personally have not seen a lot of books that really address what it was like to be a woman in those circumstances, and so I really appreciated this, and I think similar for Mrs. Dalloway, both of these are kind of an ode to all the women who didn't get a choice in their life and who maybe would have picked something else if they had had a choice. So even though in some way these women could both be considered extremely privileged for their time, I still think that it's worth looking at their experiences. So my last two for literary fiction, The Roundhouse by Louise Erdrich. This was my first Louise Erdrich, an author that I would like to read all of her works. Incredible, so sad, but really beautiful. I think a great depiction of childhood, and unfortunately a childhood being kind of robbed from someone. If you're not familiar, Louise Erdrich is an Indigenous author. I believe she is Anishinaabe, and she does write about kind of the modern or semi-modern Indigenous experience in the US, and yeah, an incredible book. A lot of trigger warnings, so look into that if that's a concern. But the final book for my literary fiction is The Vegetarian by Han Kang. This was one of the books that started me on a spree of reading translated Korean and Japanese authors that has continued throughout 2021, so I am very grateful for that. But I also just loved The Vegetarian. I think it was not at all what I expected it to be, but it was definitely like watching the unhinging of a family, and I thought that the way that she chose to tell the story was incredible. There's like 3 sections to the book, and I did find the first and the third to be my favorite. I did not like the middle section, but I also think it brought the story kind of full circle, I guess. Just 2 mentions for short stories. I read my first Alice Munro in 2020. This is this collection Runaway. Alice Munro is, I believe, considered one of the greatest short story authors of all time. It's pretty much the only genre that she writes in, and this was great. All of the stories were good. Several of them I do think about from time to time, which I think is the mark of a really, really great short story. So, and then Hall of Small Mammals, I always want to say Hall of Small Animals, was a random clearance shelf pick from Half Price Books, and I loved this. I believe that Thomas Pierce writes for the New Yorker often, I think. I don't read the New Yorker, but I did love this collection. This is something that I could go on a whole rant about, but why don't adult authors or authors who write for adults ever write about animals? There are hardly ever even pets in books. Like, people hardly ever even include dogs or cats as major characters. I think that's part of why I love translated fiction so much, because they are more likely to write about cats. But anyway, these were whimsical, weird. Some of them I would definitely consider part of like the new weird or sci-fi or fantasy genres. Some of them were not, but they were still very quirky. Most of them didn't really seem to have like a greater message or anything, but I still found them so enjoyable to read, and a lot of them I do think about. So, last category is science fiction, fantasy. I don't really always see a difference between these two, so I'm just lumping them together. I definitely have 3 top picks for this category. We will first talk about Vita Nostra. This is a translated book from Ukrainian authors, I believe. I had no idea how I felt about this book when I first finished it. So part of the reason is it's the first book in a series, and none of the rest of the books have been translated. So I need that to happen because I need to finish this series. Like, it was kind of unsatisfying knowing that there's more and that I can't read them. But this was such a weird book. So this is very dark academia. The main character, you start out following her just kind of living with her mother and I think her stepdad maybe. She ends up in contact with this man who keeps asking her to do weird tasks, and she has to do them. I don't know how to describe this book without giving spoilers. Very weird, very dark. I do have a little book vibe video for this where I tried to compile photos and music that I felt gave you the same vibe as the experience of reading this book, so that's the best way that I can describe it to you, so I will link that. I really want to read the rest of this series. I really hope it gets translated. Reading this book was incredible. Plot-wise, honestly, maybe a little disappointing, so if you're someone who's very plot-driven, I don't know how much you will love this one. If you're someone who's very experienced, like the experience of reading it driven, definitely pick it up. So that, I guess, take from that what you will. Next up is Brown Girl in the Ring. This was the first Nalo Hopkinson book that I have read. This was incredibly unique. It seems like most of her books are centered on Yoruba traditions. This was set in, I believe, Toronto in kind of a dystopian future, and so it is about the characters, who all have kind of connections to the gods or magic or spirits, are navigating kind of dystopian life. So she is such a creative and innovative author. Highly recommend. Lastly, I have Born by Jeff Vandermeer. I have talked in another video about my love for this series. This is kind of a loose trilogy. There's Born, a short story called The Strange Bird, and the book Dead Astronauts. Those two I read in 2021, but Born I read in 2020. This is about kind of a scavenger who lives in kind of a ruined city that has a lot of discarded biotech and other strange, dangerous hazards everywhere. That's all I really want to say. The first half of this, I was kind of like, okay, this is fine, you know, like it read a little bit like a YA, honestly, which isn't a bad thing, but it just wasn't what I was expecting. But then the second half of this, or like the end, I felt like really gave it a lot of meaning that I didn't initially perceive. And then as it continues into the rest of the series, just amazing. So good. And then my honorable mention for science fiction and fantasy. I'm not sure if this really counts because this was a reread, but I did reread the Southern Reach trilogy, also known as Area X. This starts with Annihilation, which I think is Jeff Vandermeer's most well-known book, has been made into a movie. Haven't seen it. Don't know if it's good, but I really, really like this trilogy. This was the first Jeff Vandermeer that I read. I think it's a good introduction to Jeff Vandermeer. I don't find it quite as like meaningful as the Born series, but it was very thought-provoking, very evocative. He writes nature in such an incredible way. Like if he's writing about like a really humid, dense, sticky environment, you can just like feel it. Can't recommend Jeff Vandermeer enough. I think he's such a good author. I'm like out of breath now. Oh my gosh. So yeah, 2020 was an incredible reading year, and I felt like it would be a shame if I didn't discuss some of my favorites. So look for my 2019 favorites maybe sometime soon. Thank you for watching, and if you'd like to hear from me more on this channel, then subscribe. Thanks.